My friends invited me to dinner, then handed me a $1,200 bill. They never expected me to look at the receipt. The bill was $1,187.42. I remember the exact number because Ryan put the receipt on the table, looked around at all of us and said, "Okay guys, let's just split this evenly." Then he looked directly at me. "It's only about 200 each." I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. What made it worse was that Ryan had personally invited all 6 of us to the restaurant and told us, in a group text and again when we arrived, "Dinner is on me tonight, I just want everyone to relax and celebrate." So I assumed the bill was his problem, until I looked at the receipt. At first, I thought the restaurant had made a mistake. Then I noticed the private dining room charge. None of us had been in a private dining room. Then I saw 3 bottles listed that nobody at our table had ordered. Then there were 2 entrees I had never even seen. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of the charges had been added to the bill at a time when I knew exactly where every person at that table had been. That was the first moment I realized the $1,200 bill wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had planned it. And for some reason, they had planned for me to pay. I should probably explain how I ended up sitting at that table in the first place. There were 6 of us in the group: Ryan, Jessica, Mark, Emily, David, and me. We had all known each other for years, although not everyone was equally close. Jessica was probably my closest friend in the group. We had worked together years earlier and stayed friends after changing jobs. Mark was the guy who could make almost any awkward situation less awkward. Emily was quieter. She usually listened more than she talked. David was friendly, but harder to read. And then there was Ryan. Ryan was the social center of the group. He was the one who organized birthdays, weekend trips, game nights, and random dinners. He was confident, generous, and extremely good at making people feel included. That's probably why none of us questioned his invitation. It came on a Thursday afternoon. Ryan sent a message to the group chat. "Everyone free Saturday?" Mark immediately replied, "Depends. Is this one of your casual dinners where I somehow end up paying $90 for a salad?" Ryan sent a laughing emoji. Then he wrote, "Dinner is on me tonight. I just want everyone to relax and celebrate." He didn't say what we were celebrating. Jessica asked. Ryan said he had something to tell us in person. That made everyone curious. I remember texting him privately, "What are we celebrating?" He replied, "Just trust me. Nothing bad, LOL." Looking back, that message bothers me. At the time, I thought it was playful. I wish I had noticed it earlier. Saturday evening, we met at an upscale restaurant downtown. It was one of those places where the menus didn't have prices for certain items unless you were looking closely. The kind of restaurant where someone came by to refill your water before you realized your glass was empty. Ryan had reserved a large table. When I arrived, Jessica was already there. She hugged me. "You look nice." "Thanks." She leaned closer. "Do you know what we're celebrating?" "No." "Me neither." Mark walked in a few minutes later. "I'm just here for the free food," he announced. Everyone laughed. Ryan arrived last. He looked unusually excited. He shook everyone's hand like he was hosting some kind of event. "Tonight is about relaxing," he said. Mark pointed at him. "You're being weird." Ryan laughed. "I've got good news. That's all." We took our seats. Dinner started normally. That part is important. Nothing about the first hour felt suspicious. We ordered appetizers. We talked about work. Mark told a ridiculous story about getting stuck in an elevator. Jessica talked about a trip she was planning. Emily mostly listened. David kept checking his phone. I noticed that, but I didn't think much of it. Ryan seemed distracted too. Every so often, he'd get up from the table. The first time, he said he needed to take a call. The second time, he disappeared for several minutes. When he returned, Mark joked, "You secretly running a business meeting?" Ryan smiled. "No, just some stuff I have to handle." At the time I thought it was weird. Looking back, it was one of the biggest red flags of the entire night. But there were other things that distracted me. Ryan eventually explained what we were celebrating. He had received some good news about work. It wasn't exactly a promotion, but it was a significant opportunity. Everyone congratulated him. I was genuinely happy for him. Ryan raised his glass. Seriously, guys, I appreciate all of you. We've all been busy, and I wanted one night where nobody had to worry about anything. Jessica smiled. That actually sounds nice.
Ryan nodded.
Exactly. Dinner continued. More food arrived. We ordered desserts later. The whole evening probably lasted close to 3 hours. And throughout it, Ryan kept repeating some version of the same thing. Don't worry about it. Order whatever you want. Tonight's on me. That phrase became important later, because I remembered hearing it at least 3 times. At one point, I asked if he was sure. He waved me off. Seriously. Don't worry about it. So I didn't. None of us did. Then the waiter brought the bill. It came in one of those black folders. Ryan picked it up. He looked at it. And something changed in his face. Just for a second. Then he closed the folder. Okay, he said. Mark leaned forward.
How bad?
Ryan laughed.
Not too bad.
He opened it again. I expected him to pull out his card. Instead, he looked around the table.
So?
He paused. Since everyone is here, let's just split it evenly. Nobody said anything.
Mark blinked.
Wait, what? Ryan smiled. It's around 200 each. I looked at him. I thought you said dinner was on you. Ryan's smile disappeared. I said I wanted everyone to have a good time. No, I said. You said dinner was on you. He leaned back. Okay, but plans change. Jessica looked uncomfortable. Ryan, I thought you were paying too. So did I, Mark said. Ryan shrugged. Guys, it's not a big deal. He tapped the receipt. It's like $200.
I stared at him.
It's almost $1,200. Exactly. If we split it 6 ways, it's not terrible. I felt embarrassed. Not because I couldn't afford $200. I could. That wasn't the point. The point was that I'd been told something completely different. I looked around the table. Emily wouldn't look at anyone. David suddenly became very interested in his phone. Jessica frowned. Ryan, you specifically said it was on you.
Ryan sighed.
I didn't think everyone was going to order like this. Mark laughed awkwardly. You literally told us to order whatever we wanted. Ryan didn't answer. Then he looked at me. You're good for your share, right? That sentence made the embarrassment worse. I said, I want to see the receipt first. Ryan immediately responded,
Why?
That was strange. I looked at him. Because I want to know what we're splitting. It's a restaurant bill. I know. So what's the issue? There isn't an issue. I just want to see it. He hesitated. Then he pushed the folder across the table.
Fine.
I opened it. And immediately noticed something wasn't right. The total was $1,187.42. But the first thing that caught my attention wasn't the total. It was the list of charges. I read it once. Then again. There were appetizers we'd ordered. Those looked correct.
There were entrees.
Some were correct. But several weren't. I looked at Jessica. Did you order the seafood tower? She shook her head.
No.
I looked at Mark. What about the ribeye?
No.
Emily shook her head. David said nothing. I looked back at the receipt. There was also a private dining room fee. I pointed at it. What is this? Ryan immediately reached for the receipt. Probably a mistake. I moved it away from him.
Wait.
He stopped. It's probably nothing. Then why is there a private room charge? Ryan shrugged. Maybe they put it on the wrong table. I looked around. We've been sitting here all night. I know. There wasn't a private room. I know. So why are we being charged for one? Ryan's jaw tightened. I don't know. I continued reading. There were 3 bottles, listed separately. I didn't remember seeing them. I looked at Jessica. Did you order these?
No.
Mark shook his head. Emily said, I didn't. David finally spoke. Maybe Ryan did. Everyone looked at him. Ryan said, no. That answer came too quickly. I looked at David. David looked away. Then I noticed something else. The time stamps. Most of the charges had been entered around the times we'd ordered them. but several of the expensive items had been added much later. One of them had been entered during the exact period when Ryan had disappeared from the table. I felt a cold feeling in my stomach. I looked at him. You said you were taking a phone call. I was. For how long? I don't know. I pointed at the receipt. This charge was added while you were gone. Ryan laughed.
Okay.
What happened during that time? Nothing happened. Then why is it on our bill? He leaned toward me. You're making this into something it isn't. Jessica spoke. Wait. Let her look. Ryan looked irritated. Why is everyone acting like I'm trying to scam them? Nobody answered. I kept reading. There was another charge.
A second degré.
A bottle. A room fee. Then another item. I looked at Emily. You didn't order this?
No.
Her voice was quiet. Are you sure? She nodded. I would remember. That was when I noticed something else. Emily looked nervous. Not confused. Nervous. I asked her, what's wrong? Nothing. Emily. She looked at Ryan.
Then at me.
Nothing. Ryan immediately said, Guys, can we just pay and go?
I stared at him. No.
He looked annoyed.
No.
I want to understand this. It's a bill. It's an itemized bill with charges none of us recognize. He rubbed his face. Maybe the restaurant put them on the wrong table. I nodded slowly.
Okay.
Then I said something that made him stop. Let's ask the restaurant. His expression changed. Just slightly.
But I saw it.
I don't think that's necessary. Why not? Because it's embarrassing. Mark looked at him. What's embarrassing about asking them to fix a mistake? Ryan didn't answer. The waiter came by. Ryan immediately said, We're ready for the checks. The waiter looked at the bill.
Then at us.
I held up the receipt. Could you help us understand some of these charges? The waiter looked surprised. Of course. Ryan leaned back. I pointed to the private room charge. We weren't in a private room. The waiter looked at the receipt. Then his expression changed. He looked at Ryan. It was brief.
But I saw it.
The waiter said, I'll get my manager. Then he walked away. Ryan stared at the table. Nobody spoke. A minute later, the restaurant manager came over. She introduced herself and asked what the problem was. I explained. She looked at the receipt. Then she looked at the charges. Her expression became very serious. I'll need to check something. Ryan interrupted. It's probably just a mix-up. The manager looked at him. Yes, that's what I want to determine. She took the receipt. Then she walked away. I looked at Ryan. What exactly happened? Nothing. Then why are you so nervous? I'm not nervous. You are. He shook his head. You're overthinking this. I looked at David. He was staring at the table.
David.
He looked up.
Yeah?
Did you know about these charges? He hesitated.
No.
It wasn't convincing. Before I could say anything else, the manager returned. She was holding another sheet of paper. I've checked the order records. My heart started beating faster. And? She looked at all of us. Some of these charges did not originate from your table. Nobody spoke. The manager continued. The private dining room was used earlier that evening. I looked at Ryan. His face had gone pale. She continued. The alcohol charges were attached to another transaction. Mark frowned. Then how did they get on our bill? The manager didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the paper, then back up. There is something else. I felt my stomach drop. What? She turned the paper around. There was a record of the transaction. And beside the charges was a notation, a payment authorization. I recognized the last 4 digits immediately. They were mine. I stared at the page. That isn't possible. The manager looked at me. Those are the last 4 digits of the card used to authorize the reservation. I looked at Ryan. He didn't move. What reservation? I asked. The manager hesitated. The reservation was made under Ryan's name. Ryan finally spoke. Okay. I can explain. I looked at him. You used my card?
No.
The manager looked confused. The authorization shows the card was used to secure the reservation. I felt my face go cold. I had given Ryan my card information months earlier. Not physically. It had been for something completely ordinary. A group trip we'd once planned. I'd forgotten about it. But apparently, he hadn't. I looked at the receipt again. The $1,187.42 wasn't just a random restaurant bill anymore. Someone had connected charges to my payment information. And Ryan knew something about it. But before I could ask him, the manager said one more thing. There is actually a second transaction connected to the same authorization. I looked at her. A second transaction? She nodded.
Yes.
She turned the paper over. I read the amount. My heart stopped. It was significantly larger than the dinner bill. And underneath the amount was a description that made me realize the $1,200 bill had never been the real problem. The dinner had only been the beginning. I stared at the amount on the second transaction and honestly thought I was reading it wrong. It was $8,640. For a few seconds, nobody at the table moved. The restaurant manager was still standing beside us, holding the transaction records. She looked uncomfortable, like she had suddenly realized she was standing in the middle of something much bigger than a billing dispute. I looked at her. What is that? She glanced at the document. It appears to be a separate authorization associated with the same reservation information. For what? She turned the paper slightly toward me. The description underneath the amount read, Event deposit, private dining reservation. I looked at Ryan. He was staring at the table.
Ryan?
He didn't answer. I looked back at the manager. We weren't having a private event. I understand. There wasn't an event. I understand. Then why is there an $8,640 authorization? The manager took a breath. I don't have access to all of the details of the cardholder account. I can only tell you what our system shows. The reservation was made using information connected to the card authorization. My heart was pounding. I looked at the last 4 digits again. They were mine. I knew my card number. I knew the last 4 digits. There was no question. What does authorization mean here? I asked. It means the transaction was approved for that amount. It doesn't necessarily mean the money was permanently captured. That's something your bank would need to confirm. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. Because I suddenly remembered something Ryan had said earlier that night. Don't worry about it. I looked at him. Why was there a private event reservation? Ryan finally looked up. I don't know. You don't know?
No.
Then why is your name on it? He frowned. Because I made the reservation.
I stared at him.
So you made a private dining reservation using my payment information? I didn't use your payment information. The manager quietly said. Our records indicate otherwise. Ryan turned toward her. You're making a mistake. I may be missing information, she said carefully. But I'm only telling you what our system shows. Jessica looked from Ryan to me. Okay. I'm officially confused. Mark leaned forward.
Me too.
Emily hadn't said anything. She looked pale. David was still holding his phone. I noticed his hand was shaking. That was when I asked the question that changed everything. David, what do you know? He looked at me. Nothing. Then why are you shaking? He put his phone down. I've had a long day. Nobody believed him. Not even him. I looked at the manager. Can I take a picture of these records? She hesitated. I can provide you with a copy of the billing information related to your table. For the other transaction, I'd need to check what we're permitted to provide. That's fine. She disappeared again. Ryan leaned toward me. Can we talk outside?
No.
He looked surprised. Why not? Because I don't want to go somewhere private until I understand why my payment information is attached to an $8,640 transaction I never approved. His face tightened. I didn't do anything to you. I haven't accused you of anything. You're acting like I stole from you. I asked a question. He looked away. That was the moment I knew he was hiding something. I just didn't know what. A few minutes later, the manager returned with a printed copy of the restaurant records that related to our reservation. She explained that the $8,640 authorization had not been processed as part of our dinner bill. It was associated with a separate reservation connected to the same account information. I asked whether the money had actually left my account. She couldn't confirm that. So I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. There was a pending charge. $8,640. My hands went cold. I refreshed the screen. Still there. I looked at Ryan. You knew about this.
No.
Then why did you look scared when I saw it? I wasn't scared. You were. He shook his head. I'm just surprised. Jessica interrupted. Ryan, what is going on? He rubbed his forehead. I told you guys, I don't know. I looked at the receipt again. Then, something clicked. The expensive bottles, the private room fee,
The extra entries,
the times, Ryan disappearing from the table, the strange way he had reacted when I asked to see the receipt, the fact that he had specifically told everyone not to worry about what they ordered. It suddenly felt less like a dinner and more like something carefully staged. I asked the manager one more question. Was anyone else listed as a contact for the private reservation? She checked, then nodded.
Yes.
Who? She looked at Ryan.
Ryan.
Nobody spoke. Ryan closed his eyes. I felt something inside me sink. Why did you make a private event reservation? He finally said, it was supposed to be for later. Later when? He didn't answer.
Ryan.
Next month. For what? He looked around the table. I was planning something. What? He said nothing. Mark frowned. You told us tonight was just dinner.
It was.
No, I said. It wasn't. Ryan stood up. I need some air.
I stood too. So do I.
He walked toward the entrance. I followed him. Not because I wanted a confrontation, because I wanted answers. Outside the restaurant, the air was cold. Ryan stopped near the sidewalk. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, tell me the truth. I've been telling you the truth. No, you haven't.
He sighed.
You're making assumptions. Then explain the $8,640. He rubbed his hands together. It was a deposit. For what?
An event.
What event? He looked at me. A business event.
I stared at him.
What does that have to do with me? It doesn't. Then, why was my card attached to it? He didn't answer.
Ryan.
I needed a card on file. And you chose mine? You gave it to me before. For the trip. I had it saved. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You kept my card information? It was in my account. That doesn't mean you could use it. I didn't actually charge it. I opened my banking app. There's an $8,640 pending authorization. He looked at the screen. His face changed. I didn't know it went through. You authorized it. No. I gave them the information.
I stared at him.
That's the same thing. He shook his head. No, it's not. At that point, Jessica came outside. She looked between us. What's happening? I showed her my phone. Her eyes widened.
Oh my God.
Ryan immediately said, it's not what you think. Jessica looked at him. Then what is it? He didn't answer. She turned to me. Did he really use your card? The restaurant says the authorization is connected to my payment information. Jessica looked stunned. Then she said something quietly. I knew something was wrong. I looked at her. What do you mean? She hesitated. Ryan asked me about your card. My stomach dropped. When?
Last week.
What did he ask? He said he needed to know whether your card was still active.
I stared at her. Why?
He said it was for something related to the dinner. I looked at Ryan. He looked furious. Jessica, why didn't you tell me that? Because I didn't think it meant this. What else did he say? She swallowed. He said you were going to be the easiest person to convince. The words hit harder than I expected. I looked at Ryan. What does that mean? He didn't respond. Jessica looked uncomfortable. I thought he meant because you're reasonable. I laughed once. It wasn't funny. Apparently not. Ryan said. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He couldn't answer. We went back inside. Nobody touched the food. The atmosphere had completely changed. Mark sat with his arms crossed. Emily was staring at the table. David finally spoke. There was supposed to be something after dinner. I looked at him. What? He looked at Ryan. Ryan shook his head.
Got it.
David continued anyway. A meeting. What kind of meeting? Business. With who? I don't know. I looked at Ryan. He said, "It wasn't your business." I almost laughed. My payment information is attached to it. That silenced him. I opened my banking app again. The $8,640 authorization was still pending. I called the number on the back of my card. While I waited, Ryan kept insisting it was all a misunderstanding. The bank representative confirmed that there was a pending authorization. They couldn't discuss every detail without verification, but they could confirm that the transaction was connected to my card. I asked what I should do. They advised me to dispute anything I hadn't authorized and to secure the account. I did exactly that. Then I froze my card. That was when Ryan finally lost his patience. "You're seriously freezing your card over this?" I looked at him.
Yes.
"You're overreacting. You used my payment information without asking. I didn't mean for it to actually charge. That doesn't make it okay." He stood up. "I was going to pay you back." "When?" "After the event." "What event?" He finally looked at me. "A business opportunity." "What business opportunity?" He hesitated. Then Mark said, "Ryan, just tell her." Ryan looked at him. "Stay out of it."
No.
Mark shook his head. "You've dragged all of us into this." That was the first time Ryan looked genuinely cornered. I asked, "Was tonight designed to make me feel obligated to pay?"
No.
"Then why did you suddenly ask me to split a bill you said was on you?" He didn't answer. I continued. "Why were there fake charges?" "I didn't add those." "Then who did?" He shook his head. "I don't know." The manager came over again. She had apparently reviewed more of the reservation history. "I may have some additional information." We all turned toward her. She explained that the restaurant's system showed the dinner reservation had originally been created for a much larger group. Not 6 people.
14. I stared at her. 14. Yes.
And then it was changed? She nodded. The reservation was reduced to 6 people earlier that week. I looked at Ryan.
Why?
He didn't answer. The manager continued. The private event reservation remained active. That explained the room charge. The extra food. The bottles. They weren't random mistakes. Someone had been moving charges around. But why? I asked the manager whether the restaurant could tell who had requested the changes. She said she couldn't provide information beyond what she was authorized to share, but she could confirm that the reservation changes had been made through the account attached to Ryan's contact information. I looked at him. "You did this." Ryan shook his head. "I changed the reservation." "That wasn't my question." "I didn't create those charges." "Then who did?" He looked down. For the first time all night, he didn't have an answer. Emily suddenly spoke. "I know." Everyone looked at her. She was crying quietly. "I know why." Ryan said, "Emily, don't." She looked at him.
No.
Then she looked at me. "I should have told you earlier." My heart was pounding. "What?" She wiped her face. Ryan was trying to put together a private event for a client. "What kind of client?" "I don't know exactly." "Then why does my card have anything to do with it?" "Because he didn't have enough available credit."
I stared at Ryan.
He closed his eyes. Emily continued. "He told me he could use your card temporarily because you wouldn't notice the authorization until after the dinner."
I felt sick.
"Why would he think that?" "Because he said you trusted him."
Silence.
I looked at Ryan. "Is that true?" He finally whispered, "I was going to put the money back." "How much?" He didn't answer. "How much were you planning to charge?" "The deposit. $8,640.
Yes.
"And the dinner?" He looked away. "I needed everyone to cover the dinner because I couldn't afford to pay both." There it was. The real reason. The entire evening had been built around his financial problem. He'd promised dinner was on him because he wanted everyone to show up. He'd arranged the larger reservation because he was trying to secure a private event. He had used my payment information because he needed a card authorization. And when the dinner bill became too large, he tried to shift the cost onto the rest of us. But there was still one thing I didn't understand. Why put fake charges on the dinner bill? Ryan didn't answer.
David did.
Because the restaurant was supposed to transfer some of the charges to the event account. I turned toward him. How do you know that? He swallowed. Because Ryan asked me to help. The table went silent.
I stared at him.
You knew? I knew about the event. Did you know about my card? He looked down.
Yes.
My chest tightened. So both of you knew.
David nodded.
I didn't think he'd actually use it. But he did.
Yes.
I looked at Jessica. She looked devastated. Mark was shaking his head. Emily was crying. The friendships I'd trusted for years suddenly looked completely different. I turned to Ryan. Why me? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Because you always help people. I almost wished he hadn't answered. Because that was somehow worse. You knew I'd trust you.
Yes.
You knew I'd feel embarrassed making a scene. He looked at me.
Yes.
You knew I'd probably pay the dinner bill before asking too many questions. He didn't respond. I nodded slowly. So you didn't choose my card because it was convenient?
No.
You chose me because you thought I was the least likely person to fight back. His eyes dropped.
Yes.
That was the moment the anger finally arrived. Not explosive anger, something colder. The kind that comes when you realize someone didn't make one bad decision. They studied your personality and decided to take advantage of it. I told Ryan I was done discussing it at the restaurant.
They left.
The next morning, I contacted my bank and disputed the unauthorized transaction. The pending authorization was canceled before it became a completed charge. The restaurant also corrected the dinner bill after reviewing the records. I didn't pay the $1,200. None of us did. The restaurant separated the legitimate charges from the suspicious ones. Ryan was responsible for dealing with the consequences of the reservations he had created. I also documented everything.
Screenshots.
Bank notifications. The original group text where Ryan said dinner was on him. The restaurant's corrected receipt. Messages from Jessica. Messages from David. Everything. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I had learned a very simple lesson that night. If money is involved, friendship is not proof of honesty. Ryan eventually called me. I didn't answer.
He texted.
I made a mistake.
Then.
I was under pressure.
Then.
I never meant to hurt you. I finally replied once. You didn't accidentally use my card. You made a decision. He never answered that message. Jessica and Mark both apologized. Emily did too.
David took longer.
Eventually he admitted that he had known more than he told me, and felt guilty about it. I accepted the apologies. But accepting an apology isn't the same thing as restoring trust. The group never went back to what it had been. Ryan disappeared from the group chat. Nobody formally announced that the friendship was over. It just ended. That's probably the strangest part. There wasn't some dramatic final confrontation. There didn't need to be. The truth had already done the damage. A few weeks later, I went back through the messages from that Saturday. I found one from Ryan that I'd completely forgotten about. He had sent it shortly before dinner. Tonight is going to be a good one. Trust me. At the time, I thought he meant we'd have fun. Now I understood exactly what he meant. He trusted that I would trust him. And that's what he was counting on. For a long time I thought the worst thing that happened that night was being handed a $1,200 bill after being told dinner was free. It wasn't. The money was recoverable. The unauthorized charge never became a permanent loss. The restaurant corrected the legitimate bill. The financial damage was contained. What wasn't so easy to recover was the way I looked at those friendships afterward. Because the $1,200 bill had been a distraction. It made me focus on whether I was expected to pay $200. It made me embarrassed. It made me argue about dinner. Meanwhile, the real issue was sitting underneath that receipt the entire time. Someone had decided that my trust was something they could spend. And the strangest thing, is that if Ryan had simply asked me for help, I might actually have considered it. Instead, he chose to make the decision for me. He didn't just gamble with my money, he gambled with our friendship. And he lost both. So yes, my friends invited me to dinner and then handed me a $1,200 bill. But looking back, I don't think the bill was ever really about dinner. It was about finding out exactly how much someone could take from you, before you finally looked down at the receipt and realized what they had really been charging you for.